Hey, welcome back to another episode of Genuine Questions. In the last episode, we talked about social media censorship. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about one of the topics that was at one time heavily censored on social media, and that is the lab leak theory. So, we can take a trip down memory lane to the beginning of the pandemic, where the origin theory of where coronavirus came from was a wet market in Wuhan, China. But there was also this theory that this virus came from the Wuhan coronavirus lab that was just yards away from the wet market in question. But they did a good job of making conversations around the origins of the virus almost impossible to have, because if you tried to say that you thought it came from the lab, then you were a conspiracy theorist. But if you said that it came from the Wuhan market in China, then some people would tell you that you're a racist, and that's, culturally insensitive to say that Asian people eat bats. So it was just easier to not even step on that landmine and have that conversation with people. But the bat theory was, at the time, the official theory that was endorsed by our public health officials. And here we're going to watch this video of Dr. Fauci endorsing this theory that the virus was transmitted from a bat to a human naturally.
Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve. And the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human.
At one time, I was even open to the possibility that it was a combination of both the lab and the wet market, and the fact that they were in close proximity to each other, because I don't remember where I heard it, but there was a theory put forth one time that I thought seemed at least plausible, that one of the employees at the Wuhan market may have sold one of the bats they had infected with the coronavirus when they were done with it, possibly got into some bats that they sold to the Wuhan market, and that's how an infected bat got into the market. I no longer think that is the case, but could be a possibility. We have no idea because there's really been no investigation. But to go back to the censorship that we talked about in the last episode, this lab leak theory was something that you were not allowed to discuss. And I want to show this clip from the Jimmy Dore show where he talks about Jon Stewart being on Stephen Colbert's show. And Jon Stewart's making a lot of jokes about how it's pretty darn obvious that this virus came out of the Wuhan coronavirus lab and not just randomly popped up yards away at this wet market. And Jimmy Dore's pointing out how Stephen Colbert is freaking out about this and trying to delegitimize the things that Jon Stewart's saying instead of just acting normal about it and letting him go on and tell his jokes, because who cares, he might be right. There's not been an investigation yet, and common sense would tell you that there's a least possibility that he could be right. And the way that Stephen Colbert reacts just further goes into that theory that the media is all owned by this sort of cabal of powerful people, whether it's, big pharma or CIA, the government, whoever you think that it is. This just goes to further that point that this is all for profit, and these news people or entertainment people have to follow a certain script.
Stewart went on Stephen Colbert's show, and he exposed Stephen Colbert for the shit libbery that he's been pushing since he became a CBS host. So Jon Stewart went on, and they wanted to talk about the origins of the Wuhan theory. Now, what's happened because of Trump is the establishment has shut down any kind of debate. You're not allowed to question anything. And if you have a different point of view, you are then ostracized, stigmatized with the scarlet letter, Trumper, bad person, Trumper.
I honestly mean this. I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to science. Science has, in many ways, helped ease the suffering of this pandemic, which was more than likely caused by science.
Now, Stephen Colbert, I don't know if you can see the look on his face, but he's saying, am I allowed to laugh at this? Is this okay, or will this get me in trouble?
So, and that's kind of...
The whole audience is applauding and going crazy, and Stephen Colbert is trying to kneecap Jon Stewart's comedic bit, which is what he's trying to do. It doesn't work. Now, and watch, Jon Stewart gets funnier and funnier, and Stephen Colbert gets lamer and lamer.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean like
Well, so
there's a chance that this was created in a lab, there's an investigation?
A chance?
Well,
oh my
if there was
God.
evidence, I'd love to hear it.
There's
I just don't
a
know.
novel...
So Stephen Colbert now acting like a moron. Well, if there's evidence, I don't know. I'd love to hear it. You haven't heard the evidence, Stephen? You didn't hear the former head of the CDC say that it was no chance it wasn't created? You didn't hear that guy say that it had to be created? You didn't hear that guy say that? Well, if there's evidence, I'd love to hear. Like I'm all for being open-minded. You're not. He's sitting there shitting his pants right now.
Respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan Novel Respiratory Coronavirus Lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's just a little too weird, don't you think? And then they ask the scientists, they're like, how did this... So wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan Respiratory Coronavirus Lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle. And you're like, no, the name of your lab. If you look at the name, let me see your business card. Show me your business card. Oh, I work at the coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Oh, because there's a coronavirus loose in Wuhan. How did that happen? Maybe a bat flew into the cloaca of a turkey and then it sneezed into my chili and now we all have coronavirus. Like, come on. Okay.
Wait a second.
What about this? Listen to this.
Wait a second.
No, stop. Why are you trying to stop the bit, Stephen? Stop being hilarious. Please stop being unbelievably entertaining, hilarious, while making salient points. We have to stop this.
All right,
John.
Oh my God. There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
That could be.
Stephen Colbert still won't allow himself to enjoy this bit. He still is there trying to, how can I derail this somehow? He's so worried. I don't want people treating me like they treated Susan Sarandon.
It could be possible. You could be right. It could be possible that they have.
So why are you so afraid? If it could be possible and it could be right, why are you acting like this? Oh my God! I don't want anybody to get because it could be. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. We've developed a bunch of shit libs to watch this show, right? And they're all going to freak out. And they did, by the way. All the liberals freaked out at Jon Stewart. The Washington Post wrote an editorial saying Jon Stewart was wrong.
The lab in Wuhan to study the novel coronavirus diseases because in Wuhan, there are a lot of novel coronavirus diseases because of the bat population there.
I understand.
It's like the saying,
it's
like,
a
wait a
local
second.
specialty, and it's the only place to find bats. You won't find bats
No, but
anywhere
it's like
else.
saying, why?
Wait, Austin, Texas has thousands of them that fly out of a cave every night. Every night at dusk. Is there a coronavirus, an Austin coronavirus? No, it doesn't seem to be an Austin coronavirus. The only coronavirus we have is in Wuhan.
Yes.
Where they have a lab called, what's the lab called again, Stephen?
The Wuhan Novel Coronavirus Lab.
I believe that's the case.
And
now,
how long have you worked for Senator Ron Johnson?
Let me tell you something about Ron Johnson.
Wait.
This is not a...
That was Stephen Colbert's band guy going. He was trying to go. It was one of those, but he did it with his piano. It was like dun dun, like dun. Oh, boom boom. With the doom happened. Oh, we got you. Boom boom. You're like, you're doomed now. We just labeled you you have committed a thought crime. You are now like Ron Johnson. You are a Trumper. That's what he did.
And you're like, that's what science does. They push things. They do the thing like, okay, listen to this. So a few years back,
we stopped filming a long time ago.
Why? Why would you stop filming one of the most entertaining, hilarious, and salient guests you've ever had? Why would you say that? He's constantly shitting on him the whole time. Like, Jon Stewart's crazy. He's got to keep signaling, Jon Stewart's crazy. Jon Stewart's crazy. Even as he admitting you could be right, but he's crazy. But you just admitted he could be right? But he's crazy. We don't even entertain that stuff. Why? Because Republicans said it.
So to fully understand the lab leak theory, there's a term that they use a lot called gain of function research. And I think it's important to understand what gain of function research is to understand why the lab leak theory is way more credible than the Wuhan bat market theory. And gain of function research, as we're going to hear in this next sequence of videos, is when scientists create superviruses in a lab. They take viruses that are not found in humans when they're found in animals, and then in the lab they juice them up to create superviruses. So I think it's a pretty genuine question to ask, what is the purpose of doing that? It sounds incredibly dangerous, and can't really think of what a good reason for creating a more dangerous, contagious, and deadly virus than what naturally exists would be, unless it's for nefarious reasons. The Obama administration actually agrees with this. They put a stop on gain of function research back when he was in office, and it was then like right after Trump got elected that Fauci quietly restarted funding this gain of function research. He just rerouted it through a third party. So the NIH or whatever Fauci's organization is called, they gave the money to a company called Echo Health. And then Echo Health gave this money to the Wuhan lab to do their gain of function research. So if you just follow the money, it still goes back to Fauci. They just, of course, can't directly give them the money anymore. So they route it through a third party, very similar to how Hillary Clinton used her attorney's offices to pay for things like the Steele dossier. So in this first clip, they're going to talk about gain of function and then talk about how the US and China were working together to create these super viruses. And then at the end is my favorite part, where Fauci says flat out, they do not do this, but if we do it the right way. And that's, again, just very reminiscent of what you saw during like Hillary's email investigation, where we're going to deny it right now, but if information comes out later that we were doing what we just told you we weren't doing, don't worry, because we're doing it on the up and up. Even though you would think that if you're doing it on the up and up, you would just admit that now when you're being asked about it, instead of saying, we're not doing it.
For years, Dr. Ralph Baric, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi Zhengli of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create super viruses. This gain of function research has been funded by the NIH. The collaboration between the U.S. and the Wuhan Virology Institute continues. Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
You are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute.
Do they fund Dr. Baric?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain of function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines.
You don't think inserting a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain of function?
That is
you would
not
be in the minority, because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain of function.
Well, it is not.
Rand Paul has evidence to back up what he's saying. There's these papers where the person in Wuhan admits that and thanks Dr. Fauci for funding for her gain-of-function research. And there's the paper trail of the money from the NIH to EcoHealth to the Wuhan lab. But Fauci just says, like, no, you're wrong. And his denial is what makes the news, but they don't show you all of this evidence that Rand Paul presents to him that makes his no, you're wrong not really seem like an adequate defense.
According to Nicholas Baker, Dr. Shi wondered, could this new virus have come from her own laboratory? She checked her records frantically and found no matches. That really took a load off my mind, she said. I had not slept for days. The director of the gain-of-function research in Wuhan couldn't sleep because she was terrified that it might be in her lab. Dr. Barrick, an advocate of gain-of-function research, admits the main problem that the Institute of Virology has is the outbreak occurred in close proximity. What are the odds?
But I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing super viruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China, and it's a huge mistake to allow this to continue in the United States. And we should be very careful to investigate where this virus came from.
Say what you want about Rand Paul and his medical degree being that he's an eye doctor, so he's not an expert to question Dr. Fauci about these things. But I'm not really interested in anything that Rand Paul is saying from a medical standpoint. I'm interested in this corruption investigation on whether or not Fauci's government organization was sending taxpayer money to the Wuhan lab to do gain-of-function research when the Obama administration said they weren't allowed to do that. And coincidentally, he lifted this pause and started funding it again in 2017, which is the same year that he made that comment about how there's no doubt that we are going to face a surprise pandemic during this administration.
There is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak.
In this next clip, Rand Paul just really drives home this point that, yes, that is what Dr. Fauci's organization was doing, is funding this gain-of-function research. And you'll notice that Dr. Fauci tries to obscure what the issue is and starts talking about, like, well, we didn't create this virus. And Rand Paul said, that's not what we're accusing you of. We're asking you if you funded the gain-of-function research. And Fauci just won't answer the question and keeps trying to say as much BS as possible to eat up the time on the clock without actually saying anything and pretending like they're accusing him of something else that's easier for him to deny.
In this paper, Dr. Shi credits the NIH and lists the actual number of the grant that she was given by the NIH. In this paper, she took 2 bat coronavirus genes, spike genes, and combined them with a SARS-related backbone to create new viruses that are not found in nature. These lab-created viruses were then shown to replicate in humans. These experiments combine genetic information from different coronaviruses that infect animals but not humans to create novel artificial viruses able to infect human cells. Viruses that in nature only infect animals were manipulated in the Wuhan lab to gain the function of infecting humans. This research fits the definition of the research that the NIH said was subject to the pause in 2014 to 2017, a pause in funding on gain of function. But the NIH failed to recognize this, defines it away, and it never came under any scrutiny. Dr. Richard E. Bright, a molecular biologist from Rutgers, described this research in Wuhan as the Wuhan lab used NIH funding to construct novel chimeric SARS-related coronaviruses able to infect human cells and laboratory animals. This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab. not in nature. This research matches, these are Dr. Ebright's words, this research matches, indeed epitomizes, the definition of gain-of-function research done entirely in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause. Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
If you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is alleging that
molecularly.
those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That
you
is
can't
not.
get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
they're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And
Go ahead and admit the truth.
And you
Senator
implying.
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent that.
could have
And
been.
if
And it
anybody
could
is
have been.
lying here, Senator, it is you.
So when you say the lab leak theory, that sort of implies by the name of it that this virus accidentally got leaked from this lab. And it could be possible that it was an accidental transmission. An employee could have gotten infected and then spread it through their family and then throughout the community. Again, that's worth investigating, but for some reason we just stuck with the infected bat at the Wuhan market theory. One of the things that I've often tried to explain to people how I see it with Donald Trump when he gives these public speeches is that it's like if you were in school and you had to do a book report and you read the book, but one of your classmates didn't read the book. They just Googled stuff on SparkNotes or Cliff Notes, whatever you guys called it. And they got sort of the gist of what was going on. And then so that student comes in to read their book report, and you, as somebody who actually read it, you're kind of laughing because you understand where they're going with it and the broad strokes that they're talking about. They're just doing the worst possible job at explaining it. And because they didn't actually read it or understand it themselves. So that is sort of how I look at a lot of what Donald Trump does. And in this next video, it's him discussing the possibility that this virus did come from the lab and that he wants it investigated.
We're looking at exactly where it came from, who it came from, how it happened, separately and also scientifically. So we're going to be able to find out.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves because they're like the public relations agency for China. And this country pays them almost $500 million a year, and China pays them $38 million a year. And whether it's a lot or more, it doesn't matter. It's still, they shouldn't be making excuses when people make horrible mistakes, especially mistakes that are causing hundreds of thousands of people around the world to die.
Are you suggesting that maybe you have some evidence that this was not a naturally occurring virus?
We're going to see what it is. You're talking about the virus and where it came from?
Yeah.
No, we're going to see where it is. We're going to see where it comes from. And, look, you know every theory. You had the theory from the lab, you had the theory from many different, the bats, the type of bat, and the bat is 40 miles away, so it couldn't have been here, and it couldn't have been there. And there's a lot of theories. But, yeah, we have people looking at it very, very strongly.
This next video will put into context what Trump was just talking about how the WHO is corrupt and in bed with China. And then it talks about how the New York Times is obviously fake news because they were trying to say that the lab leak theory was a debunked conspiracy theory, even though they actually had no reason to say that. And now we are acknowledging that that might actually be what happened.
The chief attack dog, as always, is the New York Times, who for months has now asserted in its newspaper that the idea that the coronavirus leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a, quote, debunked conspiracy theory. They have never offered any evidence to that effect. They simply state it as fact. And in their story on the incident, that's exactly what they did. Ex-CDC director Favors debunked COVID-19 origin theory. They crowd proudly. Their evidence is that the intelligence community has no evidence that the virus did emerge from the Wuhan lab, which is a complete lie. If you look at the intelligence community statement, they say, quote, the IC will continue to rigorously examine emerging info and intel to determine if the outbreak was the result of an accident at a lab in Wuhan. The other thing they cite is the World Health Organization, who said in February, quote, it is extremely unlikely that the virus was released from the Wuhan lab. But there's just a tiny problem. Of course, the WHO are basically Chinese puppets who can't be trusted. But more so, their inquiry itself is useless by their own admission. The WHO's inquiry is partnered with the Chinese government, who selected 17 Chinese researchers to help them assist. In terms of other researchers, the government is allowed to veto foreign experts. The investigators also, quote, won't be able to publish findings without official Chinese concurrence. And the WHO openly acknowledges they were denied access to records in China and, quote, did not investigate laboratories in China. Cool. So the report itself has to be stamped approved by the Chinese Communist Party, and to boot, didn't even visit the lab in question.
It's not just Donald Trump that was suggesting that this virus came from a lab. The former director of the CDC, as well as Jon Stewart pointed out, common sense would tell you that this is the more likely thing that we should investigate. And here's a video from the Jimmy Dore show with the former CDC director's comments.
Peter Daszak, a president of the EcoHealth Alliance, which sent $3.4 million in grant money from the National Institute of Health to the Wuhan lab between 2014 and 2019, thanked Dr. Fauci for backing the natural origin theory of the coronavirus. Thank you for backing this other theory that would exonerate us before you know which theory is actually true. So Dr. Fauci started off saying that it was natural. He doesn't say that anymore. But here's the former head of the CDC.
For the first time, the former CDC director is stating publicly that he believes this pandemic started months earlier than we knew, and that it originated not at a wet market, but inside a lab in China. These are two significant things to say, Dr. Redfield.
That's not implying any intentionality. It's my opinion. Right? But I am a virologist. I have spent my life in virology. I do not believe this somehow came from a bat to a human. And at that moment in time, the virus that came to the human became one of the most infectious viruses that we know in humanity for human-to-human transmission. Normally, when a pathogen goes from a zoonotic to human, it takes a while for it to figure out how to become more and more efficient in human-to-human transmission. I just don't think this makes biological sense.
So in the lab, do you think that process of becoming more efficient was happening? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, let's just say I have coronavirus that I'm working on. Most of us in the lab, we're trying to grow a virus. We try to help make it grow better and better and better and better and better and better so we can do experiments and figure out about it. That's the way I put it together.
Jimmy Dore mentioned that Dr. Fauci no longer says that he fully supports the bat theory anymore now that there is a lot of evidence that has come out to the contrary. he's starting to warm up to the idea of investigating a possible lab leak, even though he still says it's unlikely. Here's a video of him trying to backpedal from his previous comments that we watched.
Many of us feel that it is more likely that this is a natural occurrence, as has happened with SARS-CoV-1, where it goes from an animal reservoir to a human. But we don't know 100% the answer to that. And since this is a question that keeps being asked, we feel strongly, all of us, that we should continue with the investigation and go to the next phase of the investigation that the WHO has done. So because we don't know 100% what the origin is, it's imperative that we look and we do an investigation.
This next clip is of Marco Rubio, who I actually think is pretty cheesy and don't really like him or trust him that much, but for the sake of this particular Senate hearing, I did appreciate the questions that he was asking. And he is basically trying to get Fauci to answer the question of, why didn't you just say what you just said in that last video clip? Why didn't you say that from the beginning, that we need to investigate? The very first clip that we watched was Fauci saying, like, no, it's definitely naturally occurring. The tagline underneath on the news even said the NIH director rejects the lab theory. So he was fully endorsing the bat theory, and Rubio is asking the very genuine questions. Wouldn't the answer or the statement be they're equally likely? That we need to investigate because we don't know, and it could be from a bat, but it also could very likely be from this coronavirus lab where they were doing gain-of-function research that's just a few hundred yards away from the market. Could have been that too. So since we didn't know, as he just admitted in that video we just finished watching, that we don't know, why was he so dismissive of those lab theories at the beginning? And Fauci, as usual, never has a good answer to these questions.
SARS, we knew the host in 4 months. MERS, we knew the host in 9. We still don't know the host for COVID, even though, and China's not being transparent about it, even though they have a vested interest in producing the host, so they can put all those down. In a lab that we know is involved in changing viruses synthetically so that they become infectious for humans. In a lab that diplomats have told us is unsafe, in a country that had a history of lab leaks. And by the way, in a virus that we know can be synthetically created because the Swiss did it. The Swiss created an exact replica of this virus in the lab for purposes of answering it. All of these facts were available to us last April. Why? I'll start with Dr. Fauci. Why did you dismiss the lab leak theory as credible?
I didn't dismiss anything. I just said it's a high likelihood that this is a natural occurrence from the environment of an animal reservoir that we have not yet identified.
What is the basis for the conclusion that it is likelier to have been naturally occurring than a lab accident? I asked a specific question to the Director of National Intelligence, and how I posed it is it not true that it is the assessment that they are equally likely based on our information that we have? So as I outline all of these things here, is she wrong when she answered me yes? And based on everything I've just cited, what is it that we're basing the higher likelihood of naturally occurring? Is it simply because that's all we've ever seen?
Well, we have historical experience that happened with SARS-CoV-1. It happened with MERS. It happened with HIV. It happened with virtually all the influenza pandemics. So the historical basis for pandemics evolving naturally from an animal reservoir is extremely strong.
Is it just a coincidence that happened in the city that's doing this kind of research, which, by the way, is controversial? I know you and others have been supportive of it, but it's controversial. It's not widely accepted as good. My whole point is there are people out there who had Facebook posts taken down, were called kooks, conspiracy theorists, for saying publicly a year ago what we now say may be possible.
This next video is going to show my gripe with the media with all of this, because they are supposed to be investigatory journalists, and they just blindly accepted this Wuhan wet market theory and totally dismissed this conspiracy theory, this debunked conspiracy theory that it came from a lab, even though there was absolutely no reason to call it that. That's a very intentional thing to say. If you've debunked something, you have to produce the goods to show how you've debunked it. You can't just say that you've debunked it because you've never bothered to look into it. And somebody told you that it wasn't true. And this next clip shows the mindset of these people that work for the news, where she's essentially admitting that she's a political activist because, yeah, there was the lab leak theory back when Trump was in office, but he's a racist and we don't like him, so we would just be highly critical of everything that he said and never bother to look into it. And I personally just think that the people on the news should give you the facts and let you decide how you feel about things. I don't need a news organization who is fighting back and trying to trip up the president of the United States.
I think during that time when that theory started to be told, it was buried in an administration and a former president who often kind of troped in kind of racist terms and dog whistles. And so it buried the message that could have been actually reasonable, but no one was going to hear it because it came from under Trump's administration, and the media at that time was used to what he doled out, and they were going to push back on that.
But as I said before, when we call this the lab leak theory, it implies that it was accidentally released from this lab. I actually don't think that's the case. I think the coincidences and the advantages for certain groups of people are far too transparent to be coincidental. And we're going to get into some of those theories on why this should just be called the lab release theory instead of the lab leak theory in the next episode of Genuine Questions. But we're going to close this one with a clip from Jimmy Dore. Jimmy and his guests talk about actually something pretty similar to what Joe Rogan was saying in his apology video for the controversy going on with him and Spotify and Neil Young right now, where they talk about how things are censored and labeled as misinformation at one point in time, and then fast forward a couple of months and now it's okay. But you've already, instead of just letting people be able to speak freely and exchange ideas and investigate these different leads, you shut down these certain avenues of conversation and paint those people as, bad people, cuckoo conspiracy theorists, because they dare to question the narrative that then turns out to be the truth a few months later. And then him and his guest at the end just touch on what some of those historical episodes were about authoritarianism and fascism, and how we do need to recognize when it is coming, because a lot of it is right on our doorstep, and if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it.
Up until recently, if you even asked the question about that this originated in a lab, you were considered fake news and you would be censored.
Yep.
And you were ostracized into the basket of deplorables in America. If you even questioned it, you were like, oh, you committed a thought crime. You asked a question you're not allowed to ask, that you're not allowed to have certain thoughts or question things because you might be considered a Trumper. It's nuts what's going on. And of course, they'll never censor anybody who says that, oh, yeah, the dossier was right. We got a new leaked information from the Kremlin. It's all made up. You can say that for 5 years straight. It's a completely made up conspiracy theory that has absolutely evidence free. And you could do that at the top of your lung. And so certain lies and conspiracies are okay if they help the establishment. But certain truths and questions are censored if they go against the establishment. And that's the world we're living in right now. And people are, and shit libs on the left have cheered this on.
This is like, if you read Hedges' Death of a Liberal Class, he talks about it was the liberal elites in Germany that they did similar stuff to allow the Nazi party to gain. People think like Hitler just showed up one day and all of a sudden there was concentration camps. It took a long time. He passed a lot of laws and they gained power. And it was the liberal elites that allowed this crap to happen. And that's what's happening now. And
Joe Biden right now, Jen Psaki was out there saying that if you're banned from one platform, you should be banned from everyone. And we're telling the Facebook who they should ban. And the left is cheering that shit on. And they use Alex Jones as an excuse to cheer that shit on. And that's why the authoritarianism is coming from the left. That's the irony here. So, yeah, we're going to get a real fascist that's good, but that doesn't mean he's going to be a Republican. Joe Biden's doing a great job right now, and that's what people have to realize, and they have to stop voting Democrat.